My name's Khoi Vinh. I'm the design director at nytimes.com, and I also the author of a weblog at subtraction.com. Well, mostly it's about sitting in meetings. I spend a lot of time, the way I look at my job, I spend a lot of time trying to create the conditions for good design to happen, and I don't get an opportunity to do a lot of hands-on work. Really, our mission in the design group is really to try and look at nytimes.com, look at the digital delivery of New York Times content, and create a really great user experience out of it and build new features and functionalities. So that just requires a lot of background discussions and negotiations and brainstorming and getting the right people together at the table. So that's largely what I do, is try and get all those pieces in place so that the designers who work in my group can then sort of sew them up into a really great user experience on the website and on other platforms. Well, I think that the way I put our sensibility at the nytimes.com design group also really nicely meshes with mine. It's like I try to get a maximum of elegance with a minimum of ornamentation. So we're trying to do as much as we can with as little as we can. So that means using as many sort of native elements of whatever medium you're working in without trying to introduce other kind of flourishes, and making the most of those to communicate elegance and ease of use and efficiency. Yes and no. I mean, I think I sort of have a love-hate relationship with a reputation that I have for being the designer who works with grids. Maybe about 4 or 5 years ago, I wrote a series of articles on my blog, Subtraction.com, that really talked about how online designers, interaction designers, can benefit from a lot of the typographic grid principles that print designers have been using for decades offline. And that was really a big boost to my career and my reputation, and I'm so quite proud of it. At the same time, I often feel like that's all people think of me for, and if I want to talk about something else, then they kind of tune out. That's not always the case. There's maybe not a fair characterization, but from time to time it happens. I really try to keep my personal workspace as tidy as possible. I really sort of believe there's place for everything and everything in its place, as the cliche goes. So I really try to do that, insofar as I can control it. I live with a really wonderful woman, and we have a baby and a dog. So at the same time, I really have to temper that desire to control every element with the realization that life doesn't work like that. Like, you have to have a balance and understand that as much as you would like to have absolute control over everything, it's just not realistic. Well, when I came in 2006, they were in the middle of putting together a new redesign of the site, and I helped them finish that off and get that launched. And since that time, it's early 2010 now, for almost 4 years, we've been sort of relentlessly revising bits and pieces of the site, adding new functionality to it, manipulating it here and there to respond to different user needs, different business criteria, and so forth. So I think the change has been significant, though very, very incrementally paced. Well, for the very fact that it's a different kind of medium altogether. It's just like, occasionally you'll see a magazine like, I don't know, or these days a website like TMZ translated to a television show. And it's, you know, by its very nature, it has to be reimagined for the new medium. It has to be designed or rethought in a way that's appropriate to the new medium. And that's the case going between print and web, or print and any kind of digital medium. I think the thing about the internet is that it has such has so many characteristics that can be easily construed to be, you know, similar or almost identical to print, that it can be misleading. You can think, well, you just treat it the way you treat print. You're dealing with pages, you're dealing with type, you're dealing with you know, more or less static layout elements. And it turns out that's not really the case. I think the key difference between the web and print medium is on the web or in any digital medium, you're dealing with this added element of behavior. Things have a behavior online, whereas in print that there's a single canonical expression for them. But online, everything responds to different criteria or has inherent states to it based on that criteria. So you have to design that in a different way. It's a completely different dynamic, even though it may look similar. Well, if you look at the front page of the printed edition, there is a very specific, discrete set of stories that are applied there. And you can more or less expect the print reader to absorb those stories that you have on that front page in the same kind of order and more or less the same kind of fashion. On the web, you really have no idea how they're going to access the stories that you've designated to be the lead stories for the day. They could come in through search. They could come in through a blog. They could you know, come in through a newsreader. They may never see the home page as we've designed it. They may actually bypass it entirely, go directly to the article. So all of these things really play into how you think about the overall user experience and the design of it. You have to design a story that might appear on the front page of the newspaper for the website. You'll have to design it in such a way that it can be self-contained, that it makes sense if you never hit the front page of it. You know, our editors actually spend a pretty decent amount of effort retooling, rewriting headlines so that they make sense to somebody who comes in digitally, because oftentimes headlines in print are meant to sit next to other headlines and sort of benefit from that context, and we don't always have that. You know, our articles also online will change based on the platform and the technology that people are using to view them. So they may see things differently in one browser on one operating system, and very differently on another browser or even another different kind of device. So we have to think about the things that we design to make sure that they apply appropriately to the very different states that they might be encountered in. I wouldn't say that it's obsolete. I think more than people give print credit for, you know, people still turn to the print edition as the canonical expression of what the Times said that day. It's the paper of record, and the record, for now anyway, you know, is most official in print. And so, you know, the work that the designers put into crafting a really unique and powerful, and I think very, very effective presentation every day, I think is really important. I think if you took away all of the designers and sort of automated the process tomorrow, I think the end result would be really, really dissatisfying and disturbing to a lot of people. So I think there's a lot of value that print designers ask. Now, you know, how long, you know, that kind of value that they create will be welcome in the marketplace, that's really difficult to say. I think the economic pressures are pretty serious. I think the obstacles are the same as the opportunities, is the way we like to look at them. You know, we have this really powerful technological infrastructure that can do really tremendous things. At the same time, it's never going to be as flexible as we'd like it to be, just by nature of web technology. So, we can deliver news across the globe in a matter of seconds or minutes, and that's pretty amazing. And we can create, really fascinating tools for our users to take advantage of. At the same time, those technologies don't allow us to retool the appearance or the presentation of every piece of content in exactly the way that we would like. There are real inherent limitations to the tools. So it's two sides of the same coin. Sure, we often get reader feedback of both types, positive and negative, no matter what we do. Let me think. There are times when things that are really obvious to us, and we've really tried to design them in such a way that we think will be obvious to readers and users who have only casual familiarity with the site. We'll get feedback that says, they have no idea that what we intended was actually the case. And I'm trying to think of an example off the top of my head right now. We'll occasionally add sort of alternative views to the homepage, new experimental presentations of our top content, features like Times Wire. We had one called Times Extra. We have a social networking layer called Times People. And these are things that we spend a lot of time trying to make as intuitive and as easy to use as possible. And sometimes, we hit the mark, and a lot of times people will ask us, what does this thing do that you have here? I have really no idea, no understanding of it, and it just sort of blows us out of the water that that they can be so, what we've designed can be so as unintuitive as the reader might be interpreting it as. So that's always that's I think one of the hardest and most illuminating parts of the job is really constantly reminding yourself that what's obvious to you is not obvious to the users. Well, I'll tell you about a big project that we finished up late last year. We have a luxury magazine that comes inserted with a Sunday paper called T, and it covers, men's fashion, women's fashion, design, travel, living, that sort of stuff, really high-end luxury. And we had a site that we launched in 2007, I believe, that we felt pretty good about it at the time, but it quickly became apparent that it was too expensive to produce and wasn't really yielding the results that we were looking for. So we worked most of last year, 2009, really overhauling that site and moving it away from what had been a presentation that was really centered around what appeared in print to a brand new kind of user experience that really emphasized what we saw, how we saw users interacting with the content. So instead of showing all of the photography and the photo spreads and the feature stories as the sole main gateway to that site, we've moved to a new kind of experience where the content is a bit more atomized. You can sort of access it from many different ways, and we're really emphasizing the blog end of the site as the major access point, because what we saw was that users responded best to our blog, even though it was not the main access point. They responded to its timeliness and the brevity of the content. And so we completely reoriented the site around that, and that was something I really pushed for hard in late 2008, early 2009, and we were able to launch it late last year. I would say Well, one of the designers in my group, any of the designers in my group, probably will spend about 80% of their time doing, practicing design on the computer, and about 10% of their time meeting and talking with their colleagues and sort of conversationally figuring out the problems that they're trying to tackle. And 10% of their time just sort of thinking through the problem and sketching and trying to work out ideas before they get their hands on the mouse. And that's really what I try and promote, is trying to work out as many ideas as you can on paper, irrespective of the final medium, so that you can think more clearly without all of the sort of shortcuts and also the tripping points that technology offers. Well, I think that the single biggest thing that internet technology, in particular digital technology as a whole, has introduced to graphic design, certainly interaction design, is this notion of behavior, and I guess I would also say related to that is this idea of conversation. I think the way design was practiced for most of the 20th century was very declarative. A designer came up with a solution for a project and put it in place and shipped the solution, and then it landed in a reader or a customer's hands as a brochure, or they would see it as a poster or as a piece of signage, and that was sort of it. That was the end of it. I think internet technology has really upended that whole equation, because in some ways the designer's work is never really done online. Every quote-unquote finished solution that a designer presents is really just the first sort of volley in a dialogue between the designers and the publishers and the users, the people who actually are the intended audience, and the people who really will validate the design by using it or just by turning away and moving elsewhere. So designers from start to finish now in digital media have to think in a much more sort of thoughtful, serious, and humble way about how design audiences will receive their products, and that's such a huge change that will take a long time to really work out. Will take a long time for designers to really get comfortable with. I mean, we've only really been doing it for about 15 years now, and I think there's a long road to go for it. Yes, in a sense, I would say I think a lot more people are able to take on a design challenge than ever before. I mean, this was true 20 years ago when the desktop publishing revolution came about, that allowed people with Macintoshes at home to produce professional-looking newsletters or publications for the first time. So there's a long march towards more democratization for design. I think that's true. At the same time, I think there's always something about design that is going to be very difficult for more than a small fraction of people to really get. So even though the means of production are more available than ever, I think the true expertise is as rare as ever. I think even though more people can build websites today than even 10 years ago, I think there's probably even less really deep understanding of how a good website gets built than there was even then. I think design does evolve in a meaningful sense. I think if you look at design as a part of the continuum of communication, since even before Gutenberg, like going all the way back to to the invention of writing, there's always been this back and forth between conversations and sort of documents or a declarative kind of communication. So, you know, before Gutenberg, there was really this very strong sort of oral storytelling culture where being able to relay stories from person to person was sufficient. And then, you know, with the introduction of printing and mass communication, suddenly you had a lot of authority invested in the idea of a single canonical expression of a document or a piece of communication. And you know, as I said before, that's kind of the way design worked in the 20th century. And I think now we're seeing the pendulum switch back to this idea where conversations are more important, if not more important, than documents. And I think design, you know, being a relatively young profession, but intimately, you know, a part of the whole communications arc, I think, is going to need to evolve with that and really learn how to accommodate a sort of a conversational way of communication that just wasn't prevalent at all in the 20th century. I think there's a really selfish part of me that wishes that I had the tools that are available today in the context of a designer practicing in the middle part of the 20th century, when creating a single expression of an idea was the norm. And if you had the power of today's hardware and software and the networks available, you could create some really amazing sort of declarative examples of design, some really terrific design solutions that had at the same time the privilege of not being questioned the way they were in the 20th century. So, you know, in a really selfish way, I wish I had that. But at the same time, you know, I know that what keeps me interested in my job and in the medium in general, that what makes, you know, every few months more interesting or newly interesting, if not every few weeks, is the idea that everything is changing, that the ideas that you think are sort of sacrosanct and unimpeachable suddenly are up for grabs again. And I think that's turbulent, but I think there's a really refreshing sense of renewal there that always keeps me interested anyway. I think we're in this era right now where every element in a web page is rendered to within an inch of its life. I think if it's a button, it looks like a physical button. You know, if it's a mailbox, you know, that's meant to signal, you know, messaging functionality, then the whole mailbox, right down to the rivets on the hypothetical, you know, metallic housing is rendered. And I think there's a certain beauty to that school of design and illustration. I'm hoping that it's something that's going to expire soon. I think it's rather a little bit on the immature side, and I think there's actually an interesting correlation with the airbrush art that was really popular in the 70s, where suddenly you had a new tool or a new interest in a tool that could produce like a new level of fidelity. And I think you know, as technology and expertise makes possible these sort of amazing levels of fidelity to the real world, a lot of people sort of get what's the word I'm looking for? Seduced into that, and after a time, they get tired of it, and they become a little bit more interested, I think, in a certain level of abstraction, a new level of sophistication, and that's kind of where I'm hoping design will move in the next few years. guess if it was a desert island scenario and I only could take one font with me, I guess it would be Helvetica, though it has its limitations. I think it's incredibly versatile and gets the job done. And I also think it's one of the few typefaces that will really survive the test of time, beyond the next several decades, if not into the next century. I think there's just something that was just really done right when that typeface was put together. And not just that, I think the conversation that sort of grew around Helvetica, especially over the past 5 years ago, has really solidified it as a timeless classic. So that's the one I would take with me. It's certainly not the only one, but if pressed, that would be the one. Well, I think our colleagues over at The Guardian are doing a really great job with their news presentation. I think the art director over there, who's Mark Porter. Mark Porter over at The Guardian, I think, is doing a terrific job with the news presentation. He's a guy who came from a print background. He was an art director for the newspaper for a long time. And what I really like about that example is he was, quite modest in coming to the web and really understood that it required him to really immerse himself for a year, if not, several years, to really get the medium. And the results are really, really, I think, quite amazing. It's a very nicely controlled, evenly sort of executed news experience over there that at the same time really respects users' needs and goals and responds to them. And so I think that's terrific. At the same time, they have a different economic situation than the Times does, which I'm quite jealous of. They don't have to accommodate the advertising units that we do. So so part of that is jealousy. I also think over at nymag.com, New York Magazine's site, I think Ian Adelman, the design director there, is doing a really terrific job making a site that's not that different from ours, but is, I think, infused with a lot more, I think, sort of playfulness than the Times is, and has just done a terrific job over the past few years creating a site that's really full of character and I think really accurately translates the personality of the print magazine to the web without being slavish to the print side. Not really. I was about 3.5, and so I have very few memories of it. I have a few memories of being young here in the United States, but almost no recollection of being young in Vietnam. Yeah, I think there's a certain school of psychoanalysis that would say that that the disruption that I experienced, my family experienced because of the war, because of having to uproot ourselves and relocate and sort of come to grips with an entirely different sensibility or an entirely different order to the world here in the United States was huge and has a direct impact on sort of my fastidious desire to put the world in order. And I wouldn't argue with that. I think there's a huge desire in me to make sense of the world in a way that I think you can trace back to that early disruption. This idea of wanting to compensate for that really kind of traumatic experience and sort of seeing its impact on my my immediate and extended family. Well, I've only been in the one layer tennis match, which was a few weeks ago. Layer tennis is, I think, really a kind of ingenious game cooked up by a friend of mine who runs a design agency in Chicago named Jim Kudal. And in the game, two players, two opponents, usually designers, sometimes illustrators, sometimes typographers, essentially volley back and forth a Photoshop file. And with each volley, they take what their opponent had done just prior and try to build on it, and sort of add some ornamentation and elaborate on it, and then turn it around and send it back over to the other player, so that there's this back and forth where each volley is really a challenge to the other player to do something better, to one up the other player. And it's a little bit esoteric, and it's probably more fun to play than to watch, because unless the players are really in sync, it can sometimes sort of seem like two people coming up with random images and just throwing them back and forth at each other. But what makes it interesting to watch and to play really is this sort of this 15-minute stopwatch on each volley, and that sort of takes design into a new dimension that it's not typically associated with. This idea of designing live or designing in real time, and people observing that. And so I had never really played it before, and I had only seen the matches sort of after they'd been completed before. But I have to admit, it was really fun to play when I played it just a few weeks ago. You know, I think what's really great about it is it takes your design skills and makes you think in a different part of your brain, in a brain that has to respond in real time and to think very free associatively and to play and not to think about, you know, business constraints and technology constraints entirely.